Welcome back to part 2 of our lecture. This one is all about stream erosion and deposition. So what happens as your river moves around. To review, you should have just finished the lecture all about the different parts of a river and some of the measurements that we take when we study rivers and streams, like stream load, discharge of a stream, stream velocity, gradient, and all that good stuff. So now we're going to talk about what happens kind of as the stream moves along, and we have both processes called erosion and deposition. So sediment deposition is that sediment is deposited or dropped in a stream when there's a decrease in the speed of the water. So this could be because of a change in gradient, so maybe it becomes less steep, right? If it's very steep, it's going to be going really quickly, and then as it kind of levels out, it's going to go a little bit slower. When it levels out and goes a little bit slower, we're going to see a deposit of whatever it was carrying. Remember, because we said that stream load, or the ability to carry sediments or particles or solids in the river, is directly correlated with how fast the stream is moving. So if my stream is decreasing speed, that means it's going to be able to carry less or have a smaller stream load, meaning that it's got to go somewhere. So those sediments or particles are going to be dropped in the water. It could be due to a bed widening. So I don't know if you have realized this or not, but a narrower stream with the same amount of pressure or water flowing through will go quicker. If you open up, it's going to open up a stream a little bit. It's going to slow down, which would cause sediments to be deposited. Or if we have obstruction, say there was a log, the log is going to slow down the water, obviously, because it's two solids meeting a solid, and those solids might be dropped because the water is going to slow in speed. Stream deposition can create landforms and change the river valley. So if I'm depositing sediments, eventually it's going to change. You might get a sandbar. You might get little islands if it's really severe, right? There could be lots of different things that happen. So it could change the river altogether. Here's an example of a shape that we find when we have deposits. It's called an alluvion fan. It's this sloping fan shape deposit of sediments. So you can see it right here. And this one, so the water comes down from here, and whoosh, we hit a big area. And then because we hit this big area, we have a bed widening and a changing gradient. The sediments are dropped, which causes an alluvion fan, which is what we call the shape. Happens here too. So it occurs when a stream descends a steep slope and reaches flat land. So you can see it comes down from the mountains going really, really fast, and all of a sudden, whew, lots of area. So the water molecules spread out, and the sediments are dropped because they've spread out. So they're decreasing in velocity. Levees are kind of raised areas. We have natural levees and artificial. They're raised riverbanks caused by flooding. So as the river is going, if it floods, it's going to bring some of the sediment. It's going to slow down because this area right here is smaller than this area. So we're going to have deposits right here after flood. And then as it keeps happening, many floods, we're going to get larger and larger natural levees. We also have artificial levees, which are an embankment built in to prevent the overflow of a river. So this might happen in our case of New Orleans right here. We are going to drop sandbags to stop the rise of this canal right here so it doesn't overtake the street, right? So an embankment built to prevent the overflow of a lake or river. We might see these types of things when we're having hurricane and storm surges, but it is less likely because in those cases they're disaster events. We don't prepare for those very well, but we might build up the riverbank so that it will eventually not flood as much. A floodplain. So a floodplain is part of the valley floor, valley floor covered with water during a flood. So there's not water there all the time, but just during a flooding event. A floodplain forms where a stream cuts mainly side to side. Sediment is deposited onto the floodplain, making it very fertile. So we often see fields, farmers have noticed this and kind of hijacked nature a little bit and planted their plants, their crops right there because it is very good, natural, fertile soil, good for growing. If you think about the Nile River, the Nile is in the middle of a desert, but around the floodplain or where it floods, you can actually have very green, fertile, very green plants because there is fertile soil right there because as it floods, the sediments are dropped off and left there, and that makes for very fertile soil, good for planting. So flooding precautions, like I talked about, sometimes we build the artificial levees, so sometimes we'll put sandbags on canals. Sometimes we just have built them over the years because we've noticed that it floods very often. Something else that we do is that we have things like flood insurance. If you own a home in a high-risk area, you're going to have flood insurance. Another thing that we can do is be prepared to evacuate if needed. So if you know that you are in a low-lying area near a river, you might have an evacuation plan. So do you have things packed away if you need to evacuate? Do you know where you're going to go if you need to evacuate? And another thing we can do is limit floodplain development. So I told you that floodplains are great. People want to live near the water. They want to live on the river. But if by chance the river floods, your house could also flood, right? So we want to limit that floodplain development. And another thing that we wanted to talk about is, and we're going to talk in depth about wetlands. They're one of my favorite things to talk about. But the floodplain is also known as a wetland. And these actually absorb floodwater, so they're very absorbent. But when we build structures on them that are impermeable or the water will not pass through, so think like concrete, that's actually limiting where the water can sink into the ground, therefore making the flood worse. So that's one of the reasons why wetlands are protected areas. We're going to talk a lot about those on Thursday in a lecture. So this prevents structures from being put in harm's way. So why we should, well, first of all, we don't want to take up our land that absorbs the water on its own, but also why would we build a place or structure, a house, a barn, whatever it may be, where it might potentially be at risk, right? Then we just have to rebuild it, even if we do have the flood insurance. Okay, a meander. This is a name for the curve of a river caused by an obstruction. So sometimes it's just a little piece of land. Something you should know is that on the outside of the bend, we have erosion, so sediments are picked up right here. But on the inside of the bend, where it slows down a little bit, we have deposition. So the water is moving really fast on the outside of a bend. On the inside of a bend, it is moving slower, so we're going to have some sediment deposits right there. An oxbow lake is a crescent-shaped body of water resulting when a part of a meander is completely cut off and abandoned by the river. So a meander, again, is that loop. We're moving faster along the edge of our meander and slower right here. But a river can not decide because it doesn't have a mind of its own. But if it does happen, it could completely cut off this meander right here, bypassing it and making an oxbow lake. Very common around here and around rivers that are very, very old. Here is an example of one such river. So you can see all these oxbow lakes right here. They were once part of the river, even this one as it starts to fill in with the grass. And this one, and this one. But eventually it was abandoned, and you can see the meanders as well. All the loops. And you can see that on the inside right here, we have deposits of sediment, little beaches. Little beaches, little beaches, little beaches, because the water is slowing down as it moves, or it's not moving as fast right there in the inside of the meander as it is on the outside. And lastly, we are going to, hopefully by the end of this lecture, be able to identify an old river, a young river, and a mature river. So here's the difference. A young river has a V-shaped channel with a steep sides. A mature river has a more U-shaped river or gentler sloping with more sloping sides and some meanders, so some of those curves. So a young river is going to be pretty like from point A to point B, but a mature river is going to kind of, you know, take its time going from place to place. And then an old river is going to have a really flat U-shaped channel. So instead of, say, maybe this is my young river, my V, this might be my U-shaped river, my mature river. My old river is going to be really flattened out U-shape with gentle sloping sides. So if you walk down in it, it's going to gently slope down. If you are walking into a young river, it might jut down and you might be deeper than you thought you were in just a step or two. And it has an old river has lots of meanders, so lots of curves and many oxbow lakes, right? Where the river has abandoned that meander and gone on without it. Here we are in picture form, so you can see a very V-shaped valley right here in this young river. And there are very few meanders. If you can see here, this is a little bit of an older river. It's got more of that U-shaped and some meanders. Here it is in graph form. So a very youthful stream, not a lot of erosion here, or as the water travels from here to here, it picks up the debris, which will eventually make it more sloping like this with a nice floodplain. This really doesn't have a floodplain. And then as it gets even older still, it's going to erode more of the sides and have a very nice, big, large floodplain right there with some oxbow lakes and many, many meanders. A delta, it's a depositional feature of built up of sediments where a stream enters a lake or ocean. So like we talked about, when the stream or river has a wider area, it's going slower, so it's going to drop its sediments. In this case, when a stream or river enters a lake or ocean, which is generally a non-flowing body of water, it is going to slow down significantly, and then it drops all the sediments it had been carrying, and we get things like deltas because of that. That is the Nile River Delta. You can see it right here, nice and green, very fertile. Here's more of the deltas. The Mississippi Birdfoot Delta, so as the Mississippi River flows down, 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 it hits the Gulf of Mexico and slows down, drops all its sediments, and there you go. Lastly, let's talk about a dam, which is a barrier to obstruct the flow of water. Advantages, it's a storage place for water, right? We don't have any, I don't believe, any dams around us. It's a storage place for water. It can give us hydroelectric power if utilized properly. It creates recreational features, and it can be used for irrigation. So a dam, it would be like if I had a stream that was flowing gently nice, stuck a big thing of concrete right there so that all the water right here kept flowing, and backed up. And then eventually you would get a lake. Okay? And you can still have some of the water go through, but it's not as much. Okay? So it's good, it creates a recreational facility, we can use it for irrigation, it's a storage place for water, and it can give us power. But one of the disadvantages is that it increases the accumulation of sediment in the water, right? Because we've created a barrier, we are slowing down that river right there, and all the sediments are depositing. They're very expensive, and they also are destructive to the natural habitats of plants and animals. So they've got their advantages definitely, but like with everything, it definitely has disadvantages as well. Here is one example. So you can see the river had flowed from right here, and it's still flowing just a little bit here, but the majority of the water is collected right here into a lake. Same thing right here, the Three Gorges Dam, which is the largest hydroelectric in the world. You can see it right here. So the river had flowed from here, and then they created the dam, which blocked it, creating a lake, yes, and some hydroelectric power, but also being pretty destructive to the area. And just so you know, dams are not always secure, right? They can break. Here's one example, the St. Francis Dam disaster in California. Dangerous, right? So if the dam breaks, all of a sudden maybe you've built your house right around here, all that water comes rushing through, and disasters are sure to strike. Alright guys, hope you enjoyed. Have a fantastic day, and complete your notes. Don't forget to take your picture and submit it to Canvas.